Hampton Court, on the edge of London. Once the pleasure palace of Henry VIII, today it attracts almost 1 million tourists a year.
That's the #1 question, where's the Royal Loo?
It's one of Britain's biggest palaces, with 750 acres of remarkable grounds.
You have to imagine Hampton Court as a deep dish lasagna, built up of layers of history.
Amazing spaces and staff.
Everything about this room says the power of the Tudors.
Stuffed with history.
Various officers were based here. One of them was a chap called Winston Churchill.
And incredible discoveries.
This is a moment I'm going to remember for the rest of my life.
A palace packed with historic secrets, still full of life today.
Mr. Darcy, eh?
In this episode, we attempt to find out whether a recently discovered object is in fact an astonishingly rare and valuable memento of none other than Anne Boleyn.
If this turns out to be Anne Boleyn's actual falcon, this could be the find of the decade.
It's harvest time for the biggest grapevine in the world.
There's a certain amount of pressure as looking after such an important plant.
And who is the mysterious grey lady spotted in the corridors after dark?
There's a real creepy feeling that the palace gets.
It's autumn at Hampton Court. The palace is open to visitors almost 300 days a year. And every morning for team leader Kitty Casely starts with a very important and historic job.
I'm going to be opening the West Gate, which is our main visitor entrance to the palace. It's amazing thinking how many times those doors must have been opened and closed over the years. All the characters of history, the interesting figures, the Boleyns, the main plays in Tudor England would have been in and out of these gates. And you're just part of that story?
Measuring 17 feet high and 6.5 wide and made out of ancient oak, they're so large it takes 2 people to heave them apart.
It's very heavy, but as a pair we're able to open them up and welcome everyone in.
In a good year, Hampton Court Palace receives almost 1 million visitors.
Welcome to Hampton Court.
You need to show your wristband, please.
Hi there. Enjoy the visit.
It's good for you guys. Thank you.
They come to explore some of the palace's 1,300 rooms. The original Tudor kitchens, still cooking up a storm, and over 500 priceless works of art. Bringing 5 centuries of history to life is the job of the palace hosts, who entertain the crowds with daily talks.
This one area of one building that we're standing in can tell us so much about the most famous king ever, Henry VIII.
Hampton Court is really the story of 2 palaces. So you have the palace of Henry VIII and you have the palace of William and Mary stuck together here.
Of all the many kings and queens that have lived at Hampton Court, there's one royal that visitors want to hear about more than any other.
My favourite person that I like to talk about is definitely Anne Boleyn. I could talk about her all the time.
Henry VIII's most notorious wife was executed in 1536, but she's still one of the palace's biggest crowd pullers.
You get a lot of visitors that come here with Anne Boleyn memorabilia, like bags, shirts and stuff, tattoos even.
Palace host James Peacock can understand their enthusiasm.
She's got such an appeal for so many of the visitors that come in, but a lot of them will have this preconception about her. So it's kind of putting that into context, really. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be talking to you about Anne Boleyn, the second wife and queen of King Henry VIII. The time that she lived in, the 1500s, you know, was not a world like ours today. And you've got someone who tries to make the best of the situation of what's presented to her. Eyewitnesses who have gone to see her execution, they report that she showed incredible bravery going to her death. Obviously it doesn't quite work out for her, but that's all part of the story really, and the impact that she had on history. I just want to quote Thomas Cromwell. He describes her as having intelligence, spirit and courage. And I think that's definitely how we can probably sum up Anne Boleyn today. Thank you.
James isn't the only one with Anne Boleyn on his mind. 4 miles along the River Thames, at her home in West London,
Come on, Cromwell.
Historic Royal Palace's Joint Chief Curator Tracy Borman is waiting for a call.
Come on.
As one of the foremost Tudor historians in the country, people often get in touch with her about historic items they found. She's received a particularly intriguing message about a mysterious artifact.
I've had an email about a potential Tudor discovery. In fact, it's Anne Boleyn. You don't get much better than that. But I've learnt after 13 years working for the palaces not to get too excited, because I am told about things like this, not quite on a daily basis, but very often. And sadly, 9 out of 10 proved to be not quite what the owner thought. But this one is quite interesting, because if it is the real deal, then that really is something very special.
An object connected to Anne Boleyn is the Holy Grail for Tudor historians. Almost nothing from her reign still survives. If this call does lead somewhere, the find could be extraordinary.
Hi, Paul.
Oh, good morning, Tracy. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks.
160 miles away in Devon, Paul Fitzsimmons works as an antiques dealer. He recently came across a job lot of Tudor items at auction.
Thank you for agreeing to have a chat.
Amongst them was a small wooden carving of what looked like a falcon, but its poor condition meant it was almost unrecognisable.
The falcon was in such a dark state with paint and soot covering it. It's not something that most people would pick up on as being an important thing.
But Paul had a hunch that there might be something special about this carving, so he arranged for it to be professionally conserved. It was sent away to Ian Crick-Smith in Cornwall, who is an expert in historic interiors and paint analysis. It was painstaking work that took 6 weeks, but as the centuries of soot and paint began to be cleaned away, delicate details emerged. A majestic bird of prey with a regal gold crown on its head and a sceptre in its claw. As the work progressed, for the first time, Paul could start to see what the bird really looked like. And that meant he was able to start researching it properly, to see if he could find any Tudor carvings that matched his falcon. But even he couldn't believe what he would discover next.
I found this book, The History of Hampton Court Palace, a wonderful
I know
book.
it well.
Yeah. And a remarkable thing, there's an image of Anne Boleyn's falcon from the roof of the Great Hall. But what's really, really fascinating is there's 2 measurements, and it mentions it's 7.5 inches across and 8 inches tall. Well, that's the exact measurements of our falcon.
Well, that's just incredible.
Once I saw this, that's when your heart begins to flutter as an antique dealer.
The falcon was an emblem used by the Boleyn family for centuries. After Anne became queen, it was given a crown and sceptre and stood on a stump sprouting red and white Tudor roses. To cement a new era with his new bride, Henry VIII commissioned his carpenters to honour his queen by emblazoning the Great Hall at Hampton Court with his beloved wife's distinctive falcon emblem.
It's her badge, it's her symbol. You've got the imperial crown, you've got the sceptre, you've got the tree stump with the roots, the royal symbol. It sort of ticks every box, really.
The way you describe the falcon, it does sound very, very similar to the falcons that still survive in the ceiling of the Great Hall at Hampton Court. So it's possible then that your falcon was part of that decorative scheme. Do you mind me asking how much you paid for it?
£75.
Oh, wow. Well, that could just be the bargain of the century.
But there's a problem. The body of Anne Boleyn's falcon is usually pictured as white or pale silver, but Paul's falcon appears to be black. Further investigation will be needed to establish if this really was one of the falcons created in her honour to adorn the ceiling at Hampton Court.
Well, I'm still trying to keep a lid on my excitement until I've actually seen it.
The falcon is in its last stages of being cleaned. The analysis has all been done. I cannot wait to show you.
Coming up, Could Paul have really discovered Anne Boleyn's priceless emblem from the ceiling of Hampton Court?
This is something I really, really want to get my hands on now.
And the Hampton Court gardeners get to taste some very special fruit.
Not very many people can say that they've eaten grapes from the biggest and oldest grapevine in the world.
It's afternoon at Hampton Court and peak time for visitors. The Great Hall, the architectural jewel at the heart of the palace, is the place they come to imagine themselves in Tudor England.
If you're coming here as an aristocrat, as someone with money, as a powerful lord or a prince, you'll be overwhelmed by the scale of this room, because everything about this room says the power of the Tudors.
Built in 1532, the Great Hall was the public face of Henry VIII, where he would throw feasts and entertainments. It's also one of Chief Curator Tracy Borman's favourite places. She's researching a mysterious carved falcon that might have been made in honour of Anne Boleyn.
Wow.
And she's come to search the ceiling of the Great Hall for clues.
Well, this always takes my breath away. This gallery is not actually open to the public, but I love coming up here because it offers one of the best views of the Great Hall, and in particular of the magnificent ceiling, and that's why I'm here now.
At the height of their romance, Henry's Great Hall became a public love letter to Anne Boleyn. He had it decorated in her honour and emblazoned with the symbol that represented her, the falcon. It was a move that signalled her legitimacy as Henry's new queen, following his divorce from his first wife, Katherine of Aragon.
So all of these decorations here in the Great Hall were really part of some great PR campaign by Henry and Anne. Well, today Anne's falcons are actually quite hard to spot, which is why I've brought some binoculars with me. You'd need exceptional eyesight to really see them in detail, but I do know where one of them is, and it's just up there.
Tracy wants to find out just how similar it is to Paul's falcon.
You can really see the gilded tree stump that it's sitting on, the gold crown, the sceptre it's carrying, and it's resting on a bed of Tudor roses. Wow. I've never seen it quite so up close as this before. That is quite amazing.
60 feet above the ground, 43 falcons still survive on the ceiling. They are black, gold and red, very similar to the one Paul has discovered. But does this mean Paul's falcon is from the Great Hall? There's another mystery. In the history books, Anne Boleyn's falcons are shown as white or silver. So why are the ones in the Great Hall black?
It looks the part.
To try and solve this puzzle, Tracy has contacted collections curator Sebastian Edwards.
All over the hall. Here we've got copies of the building works accounts for creating the palace at this time for Henry and Anne.
Sebastian's been digging through the palace archives for information about Henry's decoration of the Great Hall.
And here we have John Heath, the painter, painting 172 badges of the kings and queens standing about the vault within the king's new hall.
That's amazing. So we know who painted them.
The historic accounts show that Henry VIII employed decorator John Heath to paint a set of newly carved falcons in honour of Anne Boleyn. But Anne's emblems wouldn't last long, and neither would her marriage. After 3 years, Anne had failed to give Henry a male heir. He was completely out of love with her. She was tried on trumped-up charges of treason and executed in May 1536. Henry set about erasing all traces of Anne to make way for his new wife, Jane Seymour. In 1536, the name of Henry's decorator, John Heath, appears in the records again. But this time, he's back to make some alterations.
But if you look, the same man, John Heath again, for altering new gilding and painting of 17 beasts for the King's new garden, and painted the same for 22 vanes, new altered for Queen Anne's arms unto Queen Jane's, and several more.
Ever pragmatic, Henry VIII had arranged for John Heath simply to paint over anything belonging to Anne Boleyn, so that the only visible emblems would be those of his new queen, Jane Seymour.
That's amazing. They are literally just painting her into oblivion. Exactly. They're painting over all of her arms and badges.
So could that have happened to the Falcon? It could change from white to black, so it would disappear into the gloom of the hall.
John Heath probably just came in and was instructed to paint over them in black, make them really disappear, just like Anne.
Yeah.
It looks like Tracy has now solved the mystery of the Black Falcons, but she'll still need more proof to say for sure if Paul's falcon was also from the ceiling of the Great Hall. Autumn is a busy time at Hampton Court. With its 60 acres of formal gardens, not to mention an enormous vegetable patch to supply the kitchen. For centuries, armies of gardeners have tended these grounds and taken care of some extraordinary plants.
It's quite difficult getting in amongst all the branches.
Hampton Court is home to the largest and oldest grapevine in the world. This extraordinary plant, known as the Great Vine, has its own glasshouse in the palace.
It can get really hot in here, sometimes in the summer, and it can be quite dusty as well, but it's enjoyable work.
Hilary Thieker has the title of Vine Keeper. She's only the 11th person ever to do the job. The Great Vine was planted in 1768, when famous landscape designer Lancelot Capability Brown reconfigured the gardens. The black dessert grapes were so sought after that Queen Victoria had them specially shipped to Windsor Castle and Osborne House, her home on the Isle of Wight.
There's a certain amount of pressure as just the responsibility of looking after such an important plant. It's got so much history attached to it.
This autumn marks the 250th harvest for the Great Vine. That's all the way back to the reign of George III. And it's expected to produce around 600 pounds of fruit. To sample one of these grapes is to taste Hampton Court's history.
Shall we see what they taste like? Yeah, go for it. Looks like a good one. I think it's a great privilege to be able to try these grapes. Not very many people can say that they've eaten grapes from the biggest and oldest grapevine in the world. That's a nice one.
Very sweet. Very nice.
Yeah, very refreshing. Good grapes.
Hampton Court is one of the best preserved Tudor palaces in the country. It's full of royal artefacts that define the era. 160 miles away in Devon, antiques dealer Paul Fitzsimmons also has a home stuffed with Tudor treasures.
It's actually a privilege to be in this business because you're almost on a permanent treasure hunt. Come on through. In the office I've got a Flemish portrait of Henry VIII. It's actually one of my favourite pieces in the house. We've got a small portrait that's possibly been cut down from a larger painting, and then we've got another English portrait of Henry VIII up here.
But despite his breathtaking collection of rare Tudor objects, nothing comes close to his recent discovery of a falcon he believes was created to celebrate Henry VIII's second wife, Anne Boleyn.
The buzz is tremendous. It's absolutely tremendous. You know within a split second of whether you're going to buy that item or not, and that feeling that you get inside, it's unexplainable.
With the falcon's conservation complete, Paul's catching up with Chief Curator Tracy Borman.
Oh, good morning, Tracy. How are you doing?
And he's got some incredibly promising news. He's been able to establish when the falcon was made.
We've just had the paint analysis back, and I think the results are absolutely fantastic, and I think it's going to excite you immensely.
Oh, really? So can you tell me a bit more?
They've detected gold, layers of white lead paint, calcium carbonate. The amazing thing is all of the ingredients that are used are all known Tudor ingredients.
Peeling back the top layer of dark paint, perhaps put there by Henry VIII's decorator John Heath, has revealed a stunning and delicate carving. Although the white paint of its body has yellowed over time, it finally looks almost as it would have 500 years ago, as illustrated in the history books, the Falcon emblem of Anne Boleyn.
Cleaning off the black and the soot, revealing its true identity is astonishing.
So this would strongly suggest it was made for Anne.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm trying and failing not to smile as you're talking, because as a Tudor historian, this is immensely exciting, and I would love to see it.
And you will absolutely see it. My desire is to bring it back to Hampton Court Palace and put it back into the context of where it should be and where it belongs.
Coming up, Anne Boleyn's precious Falcon finally lands at Hampton Court.
This is a moment I'm going to remember for the rest of my life.
And the pressure's on as the palace gets ready for Halloween.
They're perfect. Proper jack-o'-lantern.
It's a chilly autumn morning, and Chief Curator Tracy Borman is getting ready for a very special visit. As a Tudor historian, this is a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
This has to be the most exciting day I have ever had at work for Historic Royal Palaces, because today I'm finally going to meet Anne Boleyn's Falcon. Anne Boleyn just has that X factor. Anything associated with her always sparks a flurry of excitement, and I think this has to be the icing on the cake. We've never known anything like this before.
Paul Fitzsimmons has made the 160-mile journey from Devon to Hampton Court. He's meeting Tracy in the palace's Great Hall. 500 years ago, it would have been adorned with Anne Boleyn's falcons as a sign of Henry VIII's devotion.
Hi, Paul.
Hello, Tracy.
It's so nice to meet you at last.
So it's the perfect setting for Paul to reveal one of the few surviving examples to Tracy.
I can't tell you what a buzz this has created. I am like a kid at Christmas. I just want to see the Falcon. It's there within tantalising reach in your briefcase. I just want to see it.
The last time this Falcon saw daylight at Hampton Court may have been almost 5 centuries ago, as it looked down over the heads of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn.
I kind of feel like I'm dreaming as you're opening this, because I've imagined this moment.
Lost for years, it's returning to go on display as one of the most important exhibits in the palace.
I feel my hands shaking. Oh, wow. Oh, goodness. There she is. Oh, my heart is just pounding. I can't tell you, I've been thinking of nothing else. I feel like I'm staring history in the face, which I am.
It's almost like the day it was made.
It really is. I didn't imagine somehow I'd be lucky enough to actually be in the same room as it, let alone a few centimetres away.
Yes, yeah.
It's absolutely thrilling.
There's only one thing better than looking at it, and that's to actually handle it.
I hardly dare ask. Please, could I do that? That would be amazing.
Let me hand you some white gloves.
Gosh. Wow, it's quite light, isn't it?
It is, yes.
So delicate.
And very smooth.
Wow. People all around the world are just fascinated by Anne Boleyn. She has millions of fans. I can't believe that I'm lucky enough to be holding one of the only fragments left that we have of this remarkable woman, this remarkable queen. This makes Anne Boleyn real to me, and for that I have to thank you from the bottom of my heart, because this is a moment I'm going to remember for the rest of my life.
It's October, and in the greenhouse, gardener Justine Howlett is creating a Halloween display celebrating Henry VIII and his queens.
This is the first time we've had carved pumpkins in the palace that are Six Wives themed.
Hampton Court is unique in that all of Henry's wives stayed here at some point in their lives.
I think they chose Henry VIII and his wives this year just because it lends itself really well to pumpkins. There's a slight morbidity about the famous beheadings.
Contrary to popular myth, Halloween carvings weren't introduced by the Americans. Turnips were originally used, but when settlers emigrated to America in the 1800s, they found pumpkins were more plentiful there. And with Henry's wives, Katherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour perfectly executed, Justine decides to have a go at Henry himself. She's even bought a special variety for the job, aptly named the Ghost Pumpkin. But is it big enough for Henry, who's known for his very large head?
I think that's going to be the face. It's the widest point.
She's taking inspiration from one of the king's most famous portraits by German artist Hans Holbein.
He has a lovely lace collar there and a hat with jewels and the ostrich feather. That will instantly be recognisable as Henry, and that should fit perfectly on this pumpkin because it's got a lovely large face, just like Henry.
Creating a Halloween theme at the palace shouldn't be too tricky, as Hampton Court is said to be one of the most haunted places in Britain.
They dug up the garden and discovered two skeletons that had...
It's something that intrigues not only the visitors, but palace host Errol Clayton.
By the end of the Middle Ages, everyone, like their ancestors before them, would believe in a supernatural. Halloween is one of the oldest celebrations in this country, dating back 2,000 years, and based on an old Celtic celebration from sunset on the 31st of October till sunrise on the 1st of November. It's thought that within these days, the veil between our world and the next was at its thinnest, and that the souls from the other world could cross the veil and walk among us.
And it seems that Hampton Court has been a magnet for these ghostly souls. For centuries, people have reported strange goings-on in dark cloisters and deserted galleries.
You really feel it the most at the end of the day when we're closing up. And there's no guests here. It's the creaking of the wood, it's the wind passing through these corridors. There's a real kind of creepy feeling that the palace gets, and even more so at Halloween.
Chief Curator Tracy Borman has also been researching some of the palace's terrifying tales.
I've recently come across a really intriguing illustration in this old guidebook to the palace, and it's labelled The Ghost of Mrs. Penn, Edward VI's nurse. Edward VI, of course, was Henry VIII's cherished son, born here at Hampton Court, and Sybil Penn, Mrs. Penn, was his nurse, but she was also nurse to his elder sisters, Mary and Elizabeth. And it's the Elizabeth connection I'm particularly interested in, because it's very likely that Sybil Penn saved Elizabeth I's life, and in doing so, sacrificed her own.
Sybil Penn eventually became Elizabeth I's lady-in-waiting. The two were so close, Sybil was given some of the best apartments in Hampton Court. But in 1562, Elizabeth fell seriously ill, and the situation looked grave.
At first, Elizabeth just thinks it's a cold, but then suddenly she gets a raging fever. And when her doctors tell her that it's smallpox, she rages against them because she doesn't believe that someone such as herself could fall ill with this disease.
Luckily for Elizabeth, she had Sybil by her side.
Sybil was an incredibly loyal woman, and she stayed by Elizabeth's side throughout this traumatic time, desperately trying to nurse her back to health. Sadly, Sybil paid the ultimate price, because while Elizabeth recovered, Sybil caught smallpox herself and died a short while later.
Sybil was buried at the ancient church of St. Mary's, just a mile from Hampton Court Palace. For centuries, it's been a resting place for nobles and servants who lived there.
Tracy, hello, welcome to St Mary's.
Thank you
really
very
nice
much.
to have you.
It's lovely to meet you.
Tracy's hoping parish manager Jane Holmes can shed some light on what happened to Sybil Penn after she died.
Oh, wow. This is Sybil.
As a member of the royal household, Sybil was laid to rest in a marble tomb.
That is just amazing. I've seen photographs of it, but never the real thing. That is so exciting. It's quite a detailed sort of likeness, isn't it? Certainly it's a good likeness of the Elizabethan sort of headdress and, and the gown.
But there's a twist. In 1829, the church that originally stood on this site was demolished and rebuilt. Before the work started, the tombs were opened so their inhabitants could be moved to safety. But there was a shocking discovery. When Sybil's coffin was opened, her remains were missing.
It was empty, except for some hat pins and some yellow wool.
That's so intriguing. So the mystery deepens in a way.
It's believed Sybil Penn's body was moved centuries earlier to her hometown to be buried with her husband. But Sybil wasn't ready to rest in peace yet. Tracy's picked up her trail back at the palace.
Well, it was after Sybil's tomb had been disturbed that the first sightings of her ghost here at Hampton Court were first reported. And I have a map which indicates where Mrs. Penn's rooms would have been. It's in this part of the palace, so I'm going to go and try and find them. It has a bit of an air of neglect in here. Obviously once a busy office, now a bit of a storeroom, boxes everywhere. But according to this map, this is where Sybil's rooms likely were.
In 1829, these rooms were occupied by the Ponsonby family, who began complaining of sounds of a creaking spinning wheel and a strange woman's voice.
Apparently the noises became so regular that the Board of Works was called in to help investigate. And they discovered that there was a hidden chamber behind a wall. So they took that wall down and, legend has it, they discovered there an old, much used spinning wheel, possibly old enough to have belonged to Sybil.
And that wasn't the end of the ghostly disturbance.
Servants reported feeling cold hands on their faces, hearing footsteps sounding in the middle of the night, and even as recent as 20 years ago, an office worker arriving early one morning apparently saw the face of a woman at one of these windows, and when she came in, there was a woman dressed in grey who stayed for a moment before vanishing into thin air.
The sightings earned Sybil the name the Woman in Grey.
I like to keep an open mind about ghost stories, but the ones that really intrigue me are when the sightings of a particular person actually match the real history, as is the case with Sybil Penn. If I'm on my own and it's after dark, I can just imagine the centuries of people who have lived here and the sufferings of those who died here.
It's Halloween morning, and 10 minutes until the palace opens to visitors. Just enough time for Justine to get her pumpkins into place. And as Katherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard and Catherine Parr take their place, Henry is centre stage, just as he was 500 years ago. Coming up, there are more discoveries about Anne Boleyn's priceless falcon.
The symbols were destroyed after her death, so this is an incredible find for us.
Locate that somewhere like that.
And a family of kestrels move into the palace.
That would provide a nice little place for them to nest now.
Hampton Court may be one of the most historic locations in the world, but not everything here is centuries old. The palace also boasts a high-tech conservation lab, where precious items from the collection can be examined using the latest scientific techniques. One of the most exciting objects ever to come to the lab is the wooden falcon carved for Anne Boleyn.
Such an amazing object. We don't have many of them surviving. All the symbols were destroyed after her death. So this is an incredible find for us.
Constantina Vlachou has been a conservation scientist at Hampton Court for 14 years. The falcon has been loaned to the palace and it's due to go on public display. So she's taking the opportunity to learn all she can about this incredible carving, using the latest 3D technology.
Today we're doing 3D laser scanning of the falcon to create a 3D model that will capture all the dimensions much better than just an image.
The precise computer model of the falcon that Constantina is creating is already providing information about how it was painted.
You can see already that we have captured the different colors, and you can see the gilding coming through and the reds from the roses.
And there are further revelations when the falcon is examined under a powerful microscope.
So one of the first things that caught my eye was the decoration on these red roses, because they haven't been painted with just the basic red color.
These roses were painted with pigments called cinnabar and red lake. Intriguingly, these exotic colours were unavailable in England during Henry VIII's reign.
So this is a paint that was imported from Europe and gives a much deeper and higher quality hue into the decoration.
These weren't the only expensive materials used to create the falcon. The gold on the crown and sceptre is real gold. And Constantina has found almost invisible traces of another precious metal.
I was really surprised also that we found these lovely traces of silver on the surface. This is a really exciting find because it tells us that more precious materials were used for the decoration of this rare object.
The falcon will now be carefully stored until it goes on display in the Great Hall at Hampton Court. As well as the more formal gardens, the palace is set in 750 acres of historic grassland, known as Home Park. Full of ancient trees, wildflower meadows, and 300 fallow deer, it's an amazing haven for wildlife. In his office, Nicholas Mallory Garbett, the park and estate manager,
don't know what to do with that big bit, do you?
is getting ready to put up a nest box for Hampton Court's colony, or hover, of kestrels.
What we found is that the kestrels do use certain trees in the park, but due to storm damage we've lost some of those. Now this one is just to replace one that we've lost.
Kestrels don't build their own nests. They make their homes in abandoned buildings, former crow's nests and dedicated nest boxes. But they're choosy, so Nicholas must select the perfect location or the kestrels may reject the nest.
I think we're going to identify a spot where we know we can put a box at height and we can securely attach that to a tree.
The UK's kestrel population has fallen by half since the 1970s, so Hampton Court is doing its bit to boost their numbers.
I think kestrels are a really important bird for the park, and everyone likes to see a hovering kestrel. Makes you warm inside to see.
Kestrels can use the same nest for years, sometimes for decades, so Nicholas has plumped for something roomy and durable.
It's large inside with a little bit of leaf litter, a bit of wood chip in there just to make it feel more natural. It's quite a heavy thing though. It's going to be a little bit challenging to get that sitting there right.
Each breeding pair of kestrels has a territory of around 1 kilometre, so the boxes are spread across Home Park. But getting them into position is no simple matter.
Right, we're going to aim for that spot there actually, so I might just come down a bit and boom out. So we've got this lower branch that we can rest the box on, and then we're going to secure it to the branch behind.
Kestrels like their boxes to be around 5 metres from the ground, with a clear approach, so they can be seen at a distance.
Just going to manoeuvre this down slightly. I'm just going to come over a little bit to the side. Oh, catching something. Oh. See if we can get rid of that top bit there. Right, I'm going to go a little bit closer. Okay, I'm going to go with this for a minute and see how we get on. Just locate that somewhere like that.
Finally, the new kestrel home is in place.
Yeah, I think that's fairly secure. That'll provide a nice little place for them to nest now.
Kestrels aren't the only birds of prey that are being welcomed at Hampton Court. It's a momentous day in the Great Hall, as the carved falcon designed for Anne Boleyn to decorate this magnificent space,
yeah, it's really capturing the light,
is finally going on display. Valued at around £200,000, it's now a highlight of any visit to the palace and provides a link to this iconic queen. And for Chief Curator Tracy Borman, it's a dream come true.
It's just wonderful to see this in situ. It looks absolutely beautiful, all lit here. You can see the colours and the gold. It's by far the most special thing I have ever seen in all my time at Hampton Court. And Anne Boleyn, she's so iconic, she's so associated with this palace. And now to have a piece of her history here in the Great Hall is just amazing. And this bird has been on such a journey, but finally now it's come home where it belongs.
Next time, we uncover the story of Henry VIII's secret son.
Why not make him legitimate and put him on the throne?
The garden team attempts to put on the biggest tulip festival in Britain.
This is a big project for us.
And we unearth an extraordinary relic from the archives.
Family legend goes that this was the leather jerkin left by Charles I.